And they kind of protected themselves from the consumer culture by spending a lot of time with one another and then making some real intentional decisions in their life about perhaps not pursuing a job they didn't like just because it provided a better income, or maybe living in a smaller house, or maybe if they had a big enough house, making some room for people to live with them who didn't have housing at all, or to work for community programs. That's another way, and I think it really does take that kind of countercultural support to pull it off. And so that's why it's difficult, but some people are managing to do that.
Right, and I guess one last question for you based on what we were just talking about. What do you see the future of that relationship with sort of the 9-to-5 life that we live, and then sort of the off hours and weekend life? Do you see an expansion of, say, the sort of the mega church, which I guess is such a uniquely American combination of religion and sort of mass production monetary, or is there some sort of conflict, say, between a very traditional religious life and sort of the excesses of consumerism? I mean, that certainly people have been talking about, but it's never really seemed to come up. I mean, how do you see maybe, I don't know, the next decade in terms of that relationship? Well, the way to answer that question, I think, is to think about where the power lies. Who has power enough to influence the culture? Is it a group, let's say, that is motivated by concern for the poor and maybe self-sacrifice? Is it a church of some kind that encourages volunteering? Or perhaps is it Walmart and Madison Avenue and the corporate elite? I put my bets on the latter. I think the next decade's very, very much going to be like the last decade and the one before that and the one before that. I have been looking in the book that just got published a month or so ago at Americans in their 20s and 30s, and what I find there, if that's a way to predict the future, and I think it is that the economic pressures and uncertainties are just enormous. And so in some ways, even though it may not be just quite the materialistic fascination with consumer goods, it is a real struggle. And that means that for a lot of people in their 20s and 30s, whether they're in graduate school or in the military or in a job, they are having to really make a top priority their job and making a living. What I mean by the uncertainties are that if you contrast the generations, let's say the baby boomers and the current generation of people in their 20s and 30s, baby boomers certainly experienced uncertainties, but the economy was more predictable, at least for middle class, let's say college-educated people. For baby boomers, you could major in chemistry and go work at DuPont the rest of your life. You knew you had a job. You major in chemistry now, you may not have a job at all. The field of chemistry may change. What you learned in chemistry may be out of date in 2 years. You may get a job at DuPont, but you're the last one in, and so when they cut back a month later, you're the first one out. You may have to, if you're typical, change careers 3 or 4 times by the time you're 45. So you multiply those uncertainties together with the fact that people have credit card debt and, of course, housing now, the housing market's so uncertain, and the fact that younger people sometimes can depend on their parents to help them out, but sometimes cannot. It puts real
strains that what seems to happen in terms of religion, to come back to that part of the question, what happens in terms of religion is that people are just not as involved in religion as they used to be until much later, when they eventually get settled enough to get married and have kids, and then at that point they start thinking about religion again. But for the many people who are single and childless in their 20s and 30s, they've got other things to think about.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.